Whether it's the Middle Ages or modern day, manners are important. The concept of table manners exists in every age and culture, because people may take offense if you don't observe certain rules of etiquette at the table. Whether you're looking to host an event at home or go out in public, here are some things to remember when it comes to table manners in medieval times. If you're thinking about throwing a dinner party for some of your friends or family, and you are curious about what was done back in the Middle Ages in Europe, you should take note of these basic tips for hosts. As a guest, these would be quite informative as well. Some of the rules are still relatable today, as in almost every society, including those from the past. Guests are expected to show up looking presentable, behave appropriately, and hopefully have a good time. Because medieval people in Europe were very religious, prayer played a crucial role in their everyday lives. Before people started to dine with their families, or at an event, people usually said a word of prayer, thankfulness, or gratitude. Even though dining in medieval Europe is somehow similar to modern-day dining, it was a must for guests to bring their own knives. Aside from the occasional spoon provided, guests were responsible for bringing their cutlery. It would be awkward and embarrassing to show up without a knife. This unpleasant situation could leave a person hungry, as it was the era of personal eating knives. During the medieval period, knives were used to pick up food by stabbing, for example bread, meat and so on. Forgetting to bring a knife will be an uncomfortable experience for a guest. Since eating with one's hands was frowned upon, throughout the Middle Ages in Europe, forks were commonly used to hold items in place, and were mostly used for cooking. One of the first forks introduced in Europe was introduced by Theophano Sclerena when she immigrated to Rome from Byzantine to marry the Holy Roman Emperor Otto II to unite the Eastern and Holy Roman Empires. Nevertheless, forks became widely used in medieval Europe in the 14th century for eating. Spoons were always used during the mealtime, and sometimes for soups, because it was prohibited to drink directly from the bowl. And if some food is stuck between the teeth, picking your teeth with a knife was not an option. It was seen as uncivil. Well, I doubt it was for only safety reasons, because in the Middle Ages reputation was very important to people. Since it is a rule that needs to be observed at the table, picking the teeth with a knife might have been a very common behavior before the rule was introduced. Although it might sound unusual today, owning a toothpick was luxury for only the wealthy and privileged. Carrying a gold or silver toothpick in a fancy case became a way for privileged Europeans to differentiate themselves from the commoners during the Middle Ages. The less affluent made their own toothpicks using more creative methods. Before eating, guests with low ranks were expected to wash their hands before going to the table, while guests with high ranks were brought washing bowls at their seating, so that they could wash up. People were mindful of being on their best behavior in addition to cleanliness, especially when eating with a group of people. Failing to do so was a sign of discourtesy. A good way to show appreciation for a meal is to think twice before burping. It was considered unbefitting and unmannerly at the time, and yet it is still considered improper today by some individuals. Several traditional customs and practices from the Middle Ages in Europe would be considered taboo in the modern age. A good understanding of how to behave was key to making it through dinner in those times. More often than not, people usually avoid embarrassing situations, political debates, rude remarks, and overly personal conversations during meals. But in the modern world, it is quite normal to have these types of conversations. Though it might seem too strict, at least it helps minimize conflict at the table, and everyone can leave a celebration or dinner peacefully. In the Middle Ages, being aware of the amount of food one consumes was very important, because consuming more will make you disliked by those who cannot keep up with your pace. People tend to be ashamed of overeating, especially in court. It was important to chew slowly, speak politely, and chew with closed lips so that food does not fall out of your mouth and onto others. If a dish tastes good, you cannot lick your fingers or take bites from other people's food. Thus, you need to savor every bit of the taste of your meal. It's interesting how licking fingers at the table is still considered bad table manners even in the modern day by some individuals. The consequences for not observing these manners were seen as uncivil and disrespectful. Unlike today's society where some individuals don't really give much importance to good mannerisms, it is unknown as to whether or not It was a normal practice to enforce this rule during all meals. However, if a person did not comply with proper behavior and someone brought attention to it, you might be asked to leave the company. If that didn't happen and you continued breaking the rules, you would have been seen as an intolerable person who could not control themselves. To gain respect from others, people must and were willing cultivate excess levels of self-discipline and self-control. Although some of the etiquette rules in medieval times may seem unimportant in today's world, they provide a valuable insight into the differences and similarities between contemporary and medieval lifestyles. There are few medieval practices that have survived through generations, and some of these customs are still used today. It's fascinating to observe how our habits have changed as we have adapted to new ways of learning and living.